In the shadowed corners of Southeast Asia, where ancient beliefs still whisper through banyan trees and incense smoke, there are stories never meant to be heard aloud. This is Whispers of Asia, a place where faith turns into fear, where rituals forgotten by time continue behind locked doors, and where spirits don't just linger, they weep. Tonight, we follow the trail of one such tear. It begins in a quiet alley in Bangkok, where an amulet weeps in the dark, where a desperate wish binds not just fate, but flesh, and where a grieving soul, once boiled instead of buried, waits to be set free, but not without a price. This is the story of the amulet that wept. The rain had a way of soaking into the walls of Bangkok's poorer neighborhoods. It didn't fall, it crept, slowly, seeping through cracked ceilings, swollen window frames, and into the pores of everything left too long untouched. For the people living along the klongs, the narrow canals where the houses leaned in like tired old men, the rain never truly stopped. It only shifted from the sky to the floorboards. Nam had grown used to the sound of dripping, but not this. She stood just outside the bedroom door, frozen. The apartment was dark, save for the weak yellow glow of a single kitchen bulb flickering behind her. The room ahead smelled like closed air and wet plaster, and from within it came a sound no one wants to hear from an empty room. Sobbing, faint, childlike, and impossibly sad. Her hand trembled as she reached for the light switch. Her thumb paused over the chipped plastic, hesitant, as if flipping it would reveal something she didn't want to see. With a deep breath, she clicked it. The light flickered on, and there was her mother, still lying motionless in bed, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, in the same coma she'd fallen into 5 days ago. Monitors beeped gently beside her, an IV dripped. Nothing was out of place. But the crying had stopped. Nam stepped inside. She checked the floor, the closet, under the bed. She even placed her hand on her mother's cold forehead, hoping for some flicker of awareness. Nothing. No warmth, no movement. Only the silence of something just missed. She backed out of the room slowly, whispering a prayer to herself, not out of devotion, but desperation. Her mother's collapse had come without warning. One moment she was folding laundry. The next, she was gasping for air and crumpling like wet paper onto the tiles. Doctors ran every test they could afford, which wasn't many. No stroke, no heart attack, nothing in her brain scans. Just nothingness. They called it an idiopathic coma, a medical term for "we don't know." Nam hadn't slept since. She'd been working 2 jobs to keep the electricity on, and her mother fed through a tube. At the garment factory during the day, and waiting tables in a late-night noodle shop. Her shift ended at 2 a.m., and she walked home through alleyways still dripping from the monsoon, stepping over sleeping dogs and fallen lottery tickets. She wasn't religious, but poverty had a way of turning people toward things they once laughed at. Spirits, charms, prayers scratched into doorways with chicken bones. That night, as she lit a single stick of incense at the corner shrine near the canal, a hunched old woman appeared beside her. Nam hadn't heard her approach. "Your mother cries in the spirit world," she whispered. "She needs something stronger than medicine." Nam stared. The old woman's face was lined like folded silk, and her teeth were stained dark from betel nut. "You want her back," she said, as if it were a statement, not a question. I know a place." Nam should have walked away, but instead, she listened. The next afternoon, she followed the directions, not an address, but a trail, past the train tracks, through a wet market, down a flight of moss-covered steps that led under a bridge and into a corridor of rusted doors. Behind the third one, barely visible under a sheet of red cloth, was a wooden sign that simply read, "Wishes granted, prices paid later." A single bell chimed as she pushed the door open. Inside it was dark. The air was thick with smoke, not from incense, but something oilier, something sweet and rotten at the same time. Jars lined the walls, dried geckos, wax dolls, cracked skulls, and bundles of herbs tied in string. Candles floated in bowls of stagnant water, and behind the counter sat the same old woman, or someone who looked just like her. "You came," she said, as if she'd been expecting her. Nam stepped forward slowly. "I don't have money." "Money is only needed for things that don't matter. What you need costs something else." She reached below the counter and brought out a small black velvet box wrapped in red string, its lid sealed with wax etched in unfamiliar symbols. The moment she held it out, Nam felt something shift in the room, like the air pulled inwards toward the object. "This is Phra Ngan, made from sacred ash, bound with devotion and sealed in longing. You feed it with a drop of your own blood each night. In return, it will grant your deepest wish." Nam stared at the box. "And if I stop feeding it?" The woman's smile vanished. "It cries." Nam should have run, but she took the amulet, wrapped it in cloth, and tucked it inside her mother's dresser drawer. That night she sterilized a needle, pricked her finger, and let a single drop of blood fall onto the wax seal. It hissed, like steam escaping from a tea kettle. Then, silence. The next morning, her mother opened her eyes. At first, everything felt like a miracle. Her mother could speak, though softly. She could eat, sit up, smile. Nam's boss at the factory, who once scolded her for arriving 1 minute late, offered her a raise. The noodle shop doubled her tips. A stranger in the market paid for her vegetables without a word. It was as if a door had opened and fortune had come walking in. But then, on the third night, the crying returned. This time, it didn't come from the bedroom. It came from the drawer. Nam stared at it for hours. She didn't open it, didn't dare. She pressed her ear close and heard the softest, wettest weeping, like a child alone in the rain. And though every instinct screamed to throw the box into the canal, she didn't. Instead, with shaking hands, she pricked her finger again and fed it. The crying stopped. But something had changed. The lights flickered more often. The mirrors grew foggy without steam, and Nam began to wake up to find small puddles on her bedroom floor, with no explanation. She cleaned them up without thinking. She ignored the shadows in the corners of her vision, the whispering behind closed doors, the way the amulet's wax seal seemed to sweat in the heat or bleed. She told herself it was all in her head, that wishes had no price, that protection wasn't pain, until the crying returned, and this time it came from behind her mirror. It sat in the drawer like a wound, wrapped in thick red thread, sealed in smoky wax. The Phra Ngan amulet had weight far beyond its size. Nam hadn't opened the box since bringing it home. She didn't want to see what was inside, didn't want to know what face had been carved into the wax, what shape the ash had been pressed into. All she knew was that each night, after pricking her finger and letting a single drop of blood fall onto the seal, the sobbing would fade into silence. And each morning, something good happened. Her mother was improving rapidly, speaking full sentences, remembering things, laughing even. It was like the illness had never touched her. And yet, Nam never told her about the amulet. Somehow, it felt wrong to even mention it in the same room. Nam kept it hidden, even from herself. But that didn't stop it from making its presence known. On the 5th night, she woke up to find her bedsheet soaked from the knees down. No leak, no spillage, just cold, still water, as if someone had silently poured it over her legs in the dark. She jumped out of bed, flicked on the light, and looked around. Nothing. The faucet was dry, the windows locked. No trail, no drip, no footprints. But from the other room, she heard it again. That soft, sorrowful sobbing, muffled, distant, coming from inside the drawer. And now there was a new sound beneath it, a kind of wet dragging, something like fingers moving slowly across damp wood. Nam stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. She wanted to call someone, a friend, a monk, anyone, but who would believe her? Instead, she did what she always did. She walked to the drawer, opened it just a crack, and whispered an apology to whatever lay inside. Then she fed it. She had questions, dozens of them, so the next day, after her shift ended early, thanks to her supervisor giving her an unexpected half-day off, she walked back to the alley beneath the bridge. The red cloth was gone. The wooden door was closed. The sign that once read, "Wishes granted, prices paid later," had been painted over with black tar. Nam knocked anyway. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. The market behind her buzzed with life, vendors shouting, children laughing, but in front of her, the door remained still, dead, as if the shop had never existed. She left feeling colder than when she arrived. That night, she did something she'd been dreading. She opened the box. The velvet lining was stained a dull brown, not blood, but something older, something baked into the fibers. Nestled inside was a crude little figure, no more than the size of her palm. Its body was molded from dark, cracked wax, shaped like a seated child with no arms. The eyes were nothing but hollows, but the mouth was carved open in a permanent twisted weep. The red thread wrapped tightly around its torso like a binding. At its chest, a single sharp metal pin had been driven in, and around the base of the pin, faint flecks of dried blood clung like rust. Nam felt sick. Her fingers trembled. She closed the box at once and wrapped it again. But even after sealing it shut and placing it under 3 layers of clothes, she still heard it. Not sobbing this time, breathing, shallow, wet, from inside the drawer. The next few days blurred. Her life on the surface continued to improve. A distant aunt she hadn't spoken to in years sent her money. A man who'd once harassed her at work was abruptly fired for theft. The neighborhood lottery runner gave her a free ticket. Nam didn't cash any of it in. She didn't want more. She just wanted peace. But every night, the amulet grew louder. Not just in sound, in presence. The room felt heavier. Her mirrors fogged from the inside. Her phone froze whenever she tried to record. And once, just once, she swore she saw small, wet footprints leading from the drawer to the corner of her bed. That was the night she stopped sleeping with the lights off. She returned to the temple near the canal, incense trembling in her hand. She didn't know what prayer to make, didn't even know if she was still allowed to pray. Wasn't this black magic? Didn't it violate something? A young monk sweeping the walkway paused beside her. "You look troubled, sister," he said gently. Nam looked up, hesitant. "Do you believe in Phra Ngan?" The monk stopped sweeping. His face changed, not into fear, but something softer, something older. "I believe," he said, "that some people are so desperate to be seen, they'll bind themselves to suffering if it means they won't be alone." Nam swallowed. What if someone else bound them? What if they never chose? He looked down at the incense between her fingers. It had gone out. "Then you must choose to see them," he said, "and choose not to use them." That night, Nam did not feed the amulet. She sat in the kitchen, watching the drawer from across the room, a pair of scissors in her hand. At midnight, the crying started, softer than before, faint, as if it were far away. By 1 a.m., it grew louder. The sobbing sounded closer, more urgent, like a child alone in the dark. By 2 a.m., it was no longer just crying. It was knocking from inside the drawer. Then, scratching. Nam gripped the scissors tighter. Her breath caught. The room temperature dropped, not figuratively, but literally. Her breath fogged in the air. The walls shimmered with condensation, and just before 3 a.m., the power went out. Total darkness, except for the drawer. From within the seams of the box, a soft red glow leaked out, faint like a dying ember, pulsing gently. With each pulse came a whisper, not a word, just a sound, like someone trying to speak through water. Nam stood, slowly, her legs numb. She crossed the room, every instant begging her to stop. She knelt. Her hand hovered over the handle. The sobbing stopped, and from the other side of the drawer, a tiny voice whispered, "Don't stop, I'm cold." Nam screamed and leapt back. The scissors clattered to the floor. The glow vanished. The room was still, and just like that, the lights flickered back on. But something had changed. Not in the room, in her. She could feel it. Something had touched her, not physically, spiritually. A thread had been tied from her chest to something older, something buried. And she realized the truth. She wasn't feeding the amulet. She was nourishing the pain, keeping it alive. The next day, she stayed home. She called in sick, refused to visit her mother, refused to leave the room. She sat beside the drawer for hours, staring, listening, waiting. No sound. Not a breath, not a knock. It was like the spirit knew she was watching and had retreated, but not vanished. She turned to the internet, searching for anything about Phra Ngan. Most sites were vague. Some called it a protective charm. Others said it was a god of desire. A few whispered what she feared most, that true Phra Ngan are made from the ashes of the dead, from infants, from rituals gone wrong, and that when sealed in pain, in wax, in string, in blood, the spirit becomes a servant, not of its own will but by force. They are not protectors, they are prisoners. And then she found the forum. A hidden thread, a collection of stories from people across Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, anonymous users, all describing the same thing. Red thread, wax seal, crying at night, lives improving until they didn't. One post read, "He cries because he remembers being boiled alive. He doesn't want revenge, he wants release. The amulet doesn't protect you, it curses you with debt, karmic debt you will carry for lifetimes."
Nam stared at the screen, frozen. At the bottom of the post, a single word had been typed, Crit. And suddenly she remembered something. A name, a boy's name, barely whispered through the drawer on the first night she fed it.
By the end of the week, Nam no longer questioned whether the amulet worked. She only questioned why it was working. It was as if life had finally bent in her favor, like the city itself was apologizing for all the years it had ground her beneath its feet. Her mother, who should have needed months of therapy, was now walking again, laughing again, making spicy soup in the kitchen and humming old Luk Thung songs from the radio. She even joked that it felt like something came and swept the sickness away in the night. Nam forced a smile when she said it, because that was almost true. At the factory, her new supervisor offered her a permanent position without interview. At the noodle shop, customers kept handing her 500 baht notes and refusing change. Even the landlord, who once screamed at her for being a day late, suddenly announced that everyone on the floor would get 1 month's free rent, a New Year blessing, he claimed. It was unnatural, unasked for, and undeniable. Nam should have been grateful, but the joy never sunk in. It stayed just outside her skin, like mist clinging to a window. Something felt off. The world was giving too much, too quickly. And deep inside her, a second heartbeat pulsed, not in her chest, but beneath the floorboards, behind the mirror, beneath her pillow at night. She knew exactly where it came from. The amulet no longer waited to be fed. Every night at exactly 2:43 a.m., Nam would wake up, not to an alarm, not to a dream, but to a single sharp prick, as if something small and unseen had jabbed her finger while she slept. Once she opened her eyes to see blood already pooling on the tip. Another time, she awoke to find a trail of blood droplets leading from her bed to the drawer. Each morning, she bandaged the wound in silence. Each morning, she told herself this was the last time. But each night, she bled again. She tried stopping. Twice. The first night, the crying returned, more mournful than before. It echoed off the walls but had no clear source. The sound crawled across the ceiling and pooled in the corners like mold. When she covered her ears, it slipped into her bones. Her own breath began to sink with the sobbing, shallow, stuttering, wet. By morning, her fingernails had turned blue. The second time she stopped, her mother collapsed again, briefly, just enough to make Nam run screaming to the old altar in the kitchen. She stabbed her finger with a sewing needle and smeared the blood on the amulet's box. Within minutes, her mother woke up, laughing off the fainting spell. The message was clear. The debt must be paid. She returned to the forum, typing only 2 words. Child spirit? Responses flooded in. Kuman Tong, if made properly, they're revered, but if rushed or forged. Black magic amulets often use child ash or baby fat mixed with oil. Check for red thread and wax. If it cries, it suffers. Not Kuman Tong, that's too kind. You have something darker. And finally, did they use boiling instead of burning? Nam stared at the screen. Boiling. She hadn't thought of it before, but the word hit her like a nail through cloth. It felt right in a way that made her stomach turn. Burning was sacred, cleansing, respectful. Boiling was punishment. That night, Nam dreamt of water. Thick, murky water bubbling violently. A large brass pot, its lid rattling, shadows dancing around it,
human but wrong. Their faces blurred, their mouths moving in chant, and inside the pot, something cried. It wasn't screaming, it wasn't shouting, it was crying, softly, as if it had already given up. Nam tried to run, but the dream wouldn't let her. She was standing at the edge, and the lid began to lift. Steam poured out, a smell of wax, hair, and sorrow. And just before she woke, she saw it. A child's hand, slick and peeling, reaching upward, not for help, but toward her. She woke, gasping. There was water on the floor again, but this time it wasn't from rain. It wasn't from a leak. It was warm. It was cloudy, and it smelt faintly sweet. Nam collapsed to her knees. She tried to scream, but her voice cracked like broken glass. Her arms shook, her breath hitched. She was no longer living in her home. She was living in its temple. The next day, her neighbor, a quiet widow named Kun Pai Lin, dropped off fruit and incense. "You've been blessed lately, but sometimes blessings come from those who should not be called." Nam flinched. "What do you mean?" Pai Lin didn't answer directly. She pulled out a small pouch from her purse and handed it to Nam. Inside was a folded piece of gold leaf and a blackened candle wick. "Place this on your altar tonight, and don't look at your mirrors after midnight." Nam nodded, numb. Her fingers closed around the pouch like it was a lifeline. That night, she followed the instructions, and for the first time in weeks, there was no crying. But there was something worse. A giggle. Short, high-pitched, like a child hiding under a blanket, waiting for someone to come find them. The next morning, Nam skipped work and went back to the temple. She waited until the head monk was alone in the garden, pruning orchids. She bowed deeply. "I need to speak about something cursed." He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and led her to a quiet bench under the Bodhi tree. Nam told him everything: the box, the blood, the dreams, the name. The monk closed his eyes as she spoke. When she finished, he opened them slowly. His voice was calm, but heavy. "There are amulets made not for protection, but for obedience. They require suffering to remain bound. Often they are created through rituals long forbidden. Some use boiling to trap the soul in anguish." Nam stared at the screen. Why would anyone do that? To make a spirit desperate enough to serve. "I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't want to be in the pot." Nam stopped chanting. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She whispered, "I know." The candles blew out, and in the dark, something placed its hand on her shoulder. It was cold and wet and far too small. At first, Nam thought it was just a smudge, a foggy oval spreading outward from the center of her bathroom mirror, as if someone had pressed their face against the glass while she slept. She wiped it clean, but by the next morning, it was back. Not a fingerprint, not condensation, but the faint impression of something soft and sorrowful. She leaned in close. There, in the film of haze, she could make out 5 tiny marks, like a child's fingertips, and just below that, a streak that curved downward like a tear. It wasn't just a smudge, it was a face print. That night, she covered every mirror in her apartment with red cloth. In Thai folklore, mirrors are dangerous gates, thin veils where spirits can cross over, or worse, stay behind.
You never let the dying face a mirror. You never stare too long into one after midnight, and you certainly never leave one uncovered when something is crying inside your home. Nam taped the cloth down with trembling hands. Even her phone screen was flipped face down. Every surface that could reflect light, stainless pots, metal pans, glass tiles, she covered. But as she turned to leave the bathroom, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection, where it shouldn't have been. The toilet lid, shiny, white, and in its curve, distorted and watery, she saw it. A small, pale face, eyes hollow, hair wet, staring up at her from behind her. Nam screamed and spun, but the room was empty. Only the faucet dripped. But from somewhere behind the walls, deep in the pipes, she swore she heard soft weeping. The next day, her mother's health took another leap. She walked without her cane, talked about returning to her market stall, even joked about finding Nam a husband now that the gods were clearly listening. Nam wanted to smile, but her lips barely moved, because she knew now the gods weren't listening. Something else was, and it was listening far too closely. She skipped her shift and returned to the online forums. The deeper she searched, the darker the stories became. One user posted, "I had a Phra Ngan for 2 years, got rich, got married, but every time I looked in the mirror after feeding it, I saw a wet child behind me. I smashed the mirror once. Blood poured from it. My daughter died the next week." Another wrote, "They say mirrors reflect truth, but when you bind a spirit, truth becomes twisted. The spirit doesn't want to be seen, it wants to watch." Nam felt bile rise in her throat. That evening, she dug through her mother's old drawers and found an unused compact mirror, one of those little plastic ones with a pop-open lid. She placed it on the table in front of the amulet box, lit a single candle beside it, waited. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. The wax melted slowly. The air was still. And then, as the flame shrank, the compact mirror fogged. Not from heat, not from breath. It fogged from inside the glass. And in its clouded surface, a face began to form. Not fully, not clearly, just eyes, large, empty, and eternally wet. Nam dropped the mirror. It cracked. A thin web of silver fractures crawled across its surface like veins. The eyes were gone, but the sorrow lingered. That night, the crying came from beneath the bed. It wasn't just sobbing anymore. It was muffled, as if someone were lying face down, weeping into the floorboards. Nam pressed her hands over her ears, curled beneath her blanket, and whispered apologies to the air. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't know what they did to you." The crying paused, and a voice, soft, childlike, whispered back, "You do now." Nam began having waking dreams. She would walk through the apartment and see the world slightly off. The walls would shimmer. The reflections would ripple, even in covered mirrors. Her mother's voice would echo with a delay, like hearing someone speak from underwater. And always, there would be the sound of dripping. From faucets, yes, but also from walls, from inside light fixtures, from the space beneath the refrigerator. Once she opened a cabinet and found it filled with cold, stagnant water. Floating on the surface was a single, shriveled wax figure, identical to the amulet she kept sealed in her drawer. She slammed the door shut. When she opened it again, it was empty. She sought out a spirit medium next, a woman in her 40s, known in the district for helping cleanse homes with strange energies. Her name was Kunjaria. She wore white, always white, and when she stepped into Nam's apartment, her face turned gray.
"There's something wrong with your mirrors," she said first. Nam nodded. "I've seen this before. The spirit is not angry, it's trapped." She lit joss sticks and began to chant softly in Pali. Nam sat cross-legged beside her, trembling as the temperature dropped. The candlelight flickered, the incense curled upward and then bent toward the drawer. Jariya opened her eyes. "What's inside?" Nam hesitated. "An amulet." Jariya touched the drawer gently. Her hand recoiled as if burned. "This is no ordinary Phra Ngan. This was made with pain, real pain. You were never meant to carry this. You didn't make it, but you're feeding it, which means it's yours now." Nam's voice broke. "Can I return it?" Jariya shook her head. "Once fed, it binds. There is no return, only release." "How?" Jariya paused for a long time. Then, "You'll need to find out how it was made. Only by reenacting the ritual, fully, truthfully, can you reverse the binding. But be warned, some spirits no longer wish to leave." Nam felt her blood go cold. "What if I fail?" Jariya looked her straight in the eye. "Then it will stay with you, always, even after death. It will become part of your soul's weight. You will carry it through every life after this one." That night, the mirror in her bedroom cracked. On its own. No sound, no impact, just a sudden shattering from top to bottom, like a frozen river splitting open. Written in the fog across the glass, in a child's trembling handwriting, "Don't send me away." Nam wept. For the first time, she didn't weep out of fear. She wept out of grief for a child she never knew, a child she had bound, a child who had been used by others before her. She approached the drawer, unwrapped the cloth, and opened the box. The amulet sat silent, but for the first time, it was warm and wet. A tear, real, glistening, slid down the wax cheek of the figure. Nam reached out and with one shaking finger wiped the tear away. "I see you. You're not mine, but I will help you go home." The figure didn't move, but from the mirror beside her came a single word. "Promise?"
The monk did not flinch when Nam said the word aloud. Boiled. It sounded so grotesque, even leaving her mouth, but that was the word the spirit had shown her, in dreams, in whispers, in fractured images behind mirrors and puddles. She had seen the pot, felt the steam, heard the crying, and now she needed to know why. The old monk's name was Phra Ngan, and he lived at the edge of a neglected temple deep in the Thonburi district, a place most tourists never visited, where the monks still grew their own rice, and the stupas leaned like weary guardians over forgotten graves. Nam had found him through Jariya, the spirit medium. He was said to be one of the last living monks who'd once served during Bangkok's Black Years, decades ago, when illegal rituals were whispered between slum alleys and spiritual servitude was sold to the highest bidder. She found him sweeping dried leaves from the base of a Bodhi tree. He did not look up as she approached, but when she knelt and placed both palms together in respect, he spoke before she could. "You carry a crying child," he said softly. Nam's eyes filled. "Yes." The monk sighed. "And he was not burned. He was boiled." They sat together in the open sala as dusk fell. The sound of cicadas rose like static around them. The air smelled of rain and sandalwood. There are many kinds of funerals in Thailand, but all sacred rites, no matter the sect or region, agree on one thing. The body must return to the elements. Fire, usually. Ash to ash. Light to light. Nam nodded. She had attended dozens of cremations growing up. The temple, the chanting, the white string connecting mourners, the burning at dawn. But in dark corners, Phra continued, there were others, unsanctioned, secret, rituals meant not to release a soul, but to trap it. Nam's breath caught. Phra Ngan, he said. True Phra Ngan, not the commercial charms you see in shops, are created by binding a suffering soul to an object. The more pain in their death, the stronger the spirit becomes. And if the body is boiled, slowly, the soul is suspended between worlds in agony. Nam closed her eyes. Why a child? The monk's voice darkened. Because a child does not know how to resist. He told her the story of Kuman Pradam, an infamous spirit medium from decades past, feared for his ability to make amulets that never failed. His secret? He never used wax or prayer alone. He used human remains, and not burned ones, boiled in herbal oil over hours until flesh fell from bone and the soul, confused and weeping, could be coaxed into a figure of wax. If your amulet cries, the monk said, it means the spirit is not at peace. It means the ritual was incomplete or too cruel. Nam asked, can it be undone? Phra looked her in the eye. Yes, but only by repeating the ritual and changing the ending. Nam's stomach twisted. You mean I have to boil something? The monk shook his head. Not flesh, not this time. Symbol, sacrifice, spirit. That is what matters. You must prepare the same herbs, the same oils, create the same space, invite the spirit to remember everything, and then, at the moment of binding, offer release instead of pain. Nam whispered, and if I fail? Phra's answer answered her. Over the next 3 days, Nam gathered everything she would need. She visited traditional apothecaries, asking for old ingredients with names that sounded more like spells than medicines, like Dak Makam, Yalyang Sawan, and Nang Ya Kai. She bought beeswax, red thread, a small brass basin the same size she'd seen in her dream. She cleaned her entire apartment with salt water and burned dried lemongrass in every corner, covered the mirrors, spoke to the amulet gently each night, whispering what was coming. I'm not trying to hurt you, she would say. I'm trying to help you go home. Sometimes it would cry. Sometimes it would laugh. And once, just once, it whispered, don't forget the string. The night before the ritual, Nam dreamed of a small house on stilts, bamboo walls, a dirt floor, a mother crying silently beside a bed where a boy no older than 7 lay feverish and still. Outside, a man in white robes poured oil into a pot. Inside, the boy reached for his mother and said, I'm scared. The mother looked away, and the man came in, smiling, holding red string in both hands. Nam woke before dawn, heart pounding, hands soaked with sweat. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't just free the boy. She had to finish the ritual, but not as it was done before. She had to remake the space, rebuild the memory,
and at the final moment, refuse the cruelty. That evening, she set the scene. The lights were off. Candles lined the floor in a perfect circle. The small brass basin sat in the center, filled with water steeped in the herbs. A strand of red string stretched from the amulet to her own wrist. She placed the wax figure, the amulet, in the basin. It floated. The moment it touched the water, the air changed, colder, heavier. The candles trembled, the walls breathed, and the crying returned, not from one place, but from all directions. It wasn't just sobbing now, it was remembering. Nam sat cross-legged in front of the basin, holding the end of the red string. She began to chant, not the original incantation, but the release prayer given to her by Phra Ngan. May your path be unchained. May your soul return to light. May no more pain hold you here. May your name be known and honored. The water bubbled, not from heat, there was no fire, but from memory, from the ritual trying to repeat itself. Nam gripped the string tighter. Crete, that's your name, isn't it? A small voice answered. Yes. Tears poured down her face. I'm sorry, I didn't know. They used you and I kept you. The figure in the water began to sink, not from weight, but from will. The wax softened, the red string unraveled, and for the first time, the sobbing began to sound lighter, like a boy remembering laughter. Nam whispered, "You don't have to protect me anymore." The lights flickered, then went still, and in the mirror closest to her, a small boy appeared, wet, pale, but not angry. He looked at her, and he smiled. Then he spoke. "Can I go now?" Nam nodded, sobbing. "Yes, you can go." The boy closed his eyes, and at that instant the wax dissolved, the strings snapped, the water stilled, and silence, true sacred silence, fell over the room. Nam sat there for a long time, not afraid, just grieving, not for herself, but for him, a boy who never asked to be trapped, who never asked to be bound, who only wanted to be remembered and released. The wax had melted, the string had snapped, the water had stilled, and for the first time in weeks, Nam felt something she barely recognized: hope. The crying had stopped. No more wet footprints, no more whispers behind glass, no more shivering air pressing into her chest like unseen hands. She sat in that silence for hours, surrounded by the melted remnants of the ritual, breathing softly as candlelight flickered across her tear-streaked cheeks. Crete was gone, she was sure of it. But the next night, she bled again. It began as a pinprick, just like before, a sharp sting on her fingertip at exactly 2:43 a.m. She sat up, groggy and confused, glancing at her hand. There, in the moonlight, was a fresh bead of blood forming on her finger. Nam blinked. "No," she whispered, "it's over." She stumbled to the bathroom, rinsed it off, wrapped it in gauze. Maybe it was just leftover, her body so used to the ritual that it continued the habit in her sleep. She didn't feed the amulet, because it no longer existed. But as she passed the mirror, she saw something that turned her blood cold. In the foggy corner of the glass, a message had appeared, scrawled in a child's trembling hand. "I left, but something stayed." Nam sat in the kitchen with the lights on until sunrise. The wax was gone, the string was burned,
But the space where the amulet had been, the drawer lined with velvet, now empty, still pulsed with unseen weight. It was like a hole left behind in the fabric of the world. Not a presence, a scar. And some nights, scars reopen. She returned to Phra Ngan the next day, her voice shaking. I did the ritual. I set him free, but I'm still bleeding. I'm still being touched. The old monk nodded slowly, as if he had feared this all along. When a spirit is bound to an object, the bond is not only with the object, but with the person who feeds it. You didn't just carry Crete's pain, you became part of it. Nam's voice dropped to a whisper. You mean, the suffering changed me? Yes, and something may have noticed. Nam stiffened. Something? The monk's voice was quiet, almost mournful. When a spirit leaves a vessel, the space it occupied is not empty. It's like removing a stone from a river. The water rushes to fill the void, and not all spirits are gentle. That night, the bleeding worsened. Not just her finger, her nose, her gums, the corner of her eye. Tiny cuts, like paper-thin slices appearing from nowhere. She woke with blood on her pillow, her sheets speckled red like fallen petals. And the crying returned. But it wasn't Crete's voice. This crying was deeper, hollow, older. It echoed, not from beneath the bed or behind the mirror, but inside her. Nam clutched her chest, shivering as the sound filled her ribcage like smoke. She tried everything: burning sage, salt lines, Buddhist chants, even Christian prayers she barely remembered from a school friend's funeral. Nothing stopped it. Every night, the bleeding continued. Every night, the crying deepened. And soon, the house began to react. Mirrors didn't just fog, they cracked. Lights didn't flicker, they shattered. Water didn't drip, it ran from the walls. Nam's apartment was no longer haunted by a spirit, it was becoming a wound. Desperately, she returned to Kun Jariya, the spirit medium. The moment she entered the room, Jariya gasped, "You didn't cleanse yourself." Nam blinked. "I released the child." "Yes, but you never released yourself." She explained that in rituals of spiritual servitude, especially those involving blood, the one who feeds becomes linked to the chain. You became part of the curse. When Crete left, the chain broke on his end, but not on yours. Now your soul is bleeding, and something darker is tasting it. Nam's hands trembled. "What do I do?" "You must finish the ritual again, but this time it's not about freeing him. It's about freeing you." Jariya gave her a list. Ash from sandalwood, oil from lotus seeds, 7 strands of red thread tied from wrist to wrist, 1 drop of blood placed not on the amulet, but on her own reflection. The spirit inside you is trying to get out. You must not allow it. You must speak your name in the mirror, bind your identity, refuse the chain. Nam barely understood, but by now she had learned one thing. Rituals don't need to be understood, only obeyed. That night, Nam followed every instruction. She lit the oil, placed the ash in a circle, tied the red threads around both wrists, and stared into the mirror with a candle at her side. Her own face stared back, pale, exhausted, streaked with blood from a fresh nosebleed. She pricked her finger. Let the blood fall onto the glass. It spread across her reflection, warping her image. Then the mirror shivered, not cracked, not broke. It breathed. And from within the glass, a hand reached out. Her own hand,
only soaked in black water and weeping. Nam screamed. The lights went out, the candles flickered blue, and a voice whispered from the mirror, "You fed me, you opened the gate, now stay with me forever." Nam gritted her teeth. "No!" She screamed her name, once, twice, 3 times. "I am Nam, I am not yours." She grabbed the mirror and hurled it to the floor. It shattered, the red thread snapped, the room went still, and the crying stopped. Nam collapsed, not in fear, in silence. For the first time in weeks, no blood came, no shadows moved, no water dripped. Only breath, her own, unshaken, undisturbed. But on the wall, written in fog, just one final word. Almost.
The rain had started again. Not the soft kind that kisses rooftops and disappears, but the thick, relentless kind that drowns sound and memory alike. It pooled in the gutters. It crawled through the cracks in the walls. It dripped endlessly from the corners of Nam's windows. She didn't sleep. Not since the mirror shattered. Not since that final word appeared. Not from Crit, but from something else. Almost. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew where to go to find out. His name was Precha, a retired undertaker and former assistant to a spirit medium. Jariya had tracked him down after a night of desperate phone calls. He now lived in a rotting houseboat docked behind a closed temple in Nonthaburi. The roof was caved in, the walls leaned inward like tired lungs. And yet, the man inside was sharp-eyed and waiting. "You have one of his amulets," he said the moment Nam stepped inside. He didn't need to ask. The scent of wax and grief had entered before she did. Nam sat cross-legged across from him as the rain beat down on the tin roof. "I did. I think I set him free." Precha gave her a long, unreadable look. Then he lit a cigarette and stared at the smoke as it curled around the rafters. "He was 7. His name was Crit. His mother was a laundry worker at the canal. Father gone. She came to us after he got sick, a fever that wouldn't break. She begged for a blessing, something to save him." He paused. Ash fell from his cigarette onto the wooden floor. "The medium, my old boss, said he could help, but only if she agreed to a substitution ritual. It's a lie, that term. What it means is you give up something now to keep everything else later." Nam felt cold creep down her spine. "She agreed?" Precha nodded once. He told her it was temporary, that the boy's soul would be borrowed, wrapped in wax and oil, sealed in protection, and returned. Nam's voice cracked. "But that's not what happened." "No," Precha said, "because Crit died during the ritual." He tapped ash into a cracked bowl beside him. "He was too hot. The fever was too far gone. He convulsed, foamed, went still. The medium panicked. He couldn't lose the soul, not once it had been promised, so he ordered me to start the pot." Nam covered her mouth. "You boiled him?" Preacher closed his eyes. He wasn't cold yet, his skin still warm. Nam gagged. Tears slid down her cheeks. Her hands gripped her knees until her nails cut into skin. Preacher didn't cry. His face was empty, the kind of emptiness that takes years to build. "I helped wrap the ash in wax. I tied the string. I pressed the pin into the chest. The medium chanted until his voice broke. We sealed the amulet in red lacquer and sold it to a merchant's wife for protection against miscarriage." Nam shook her head. "How did it end up with me?" Preacher shrugged. "They get passed around, traded, lost, buried.
Sometimes they come back on their own. Nam stared at the floor. He never wanted to serve. He just wanted to be warm. Preacher finally looked at her. Do you know what the worst part is? She shook her head. He still believed someone would come for him, even after death, even in the pot. The silence between them was thick and sacred. He called for his mother. She never came back. Nam stood. I have to find her. Preacher didn't stop her. He just handed her a faded photo wrapped in old gauze. It showed a woman, thin and tired, holding a boy in her arms. This was taken 2 weeks before the ritual. Her name was Mali. It took Nam 3 days of walking, asking, knocking on doors in the old canal district, showing the photo to everyone from market vendors to trash collectors. And on the 4th day, she found her. A woman in her 60s, sitting barefoot beneath a stilt house, peeling tamarind into a rusted bowl. Her eyes, the same shape as Krit's, widened when she saw the photo. Then they welled. Nam sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. I thought I'd buried him, Mali whispered. They told me the pot was just symbolic, that he would be returned. I waited for weeks. Nam nodded. They lied. Mali stared at the river. I knew it. I knew it when I heard the water bubbling at night. I knew when the walls began to cry. She turned to Nam. Did you see him? Nam's voice was barely audible. Yes. Was he angry? Nam's throat clenched. No, just sad. Mali's tears spilled. I hear him, sometimes, in my dreams. He calls my name but never finishes it. Just, Ma, Ma. Nam reached out and took her hand. He remembers you. That night, Nam returned home carrying a new name in her heart. Not just Krit, the boy, but Mali, the mother. The woman who had been tricked, the woman who had grieved, the woman who had waited for her son to come home for decades. Nam lit incense, placed a bowl of jasmine rice in front of the old drawer, and whispered, I found her. She's still waiting for you. And now she knows. The apartment was still, but from the hallway mirror, one final tear formed on the glass, and in the steam, a message appeared. Thank you. Nam smiled through her tears, but the warmth in her chest was short-lived, because just as she turned away, she noticed something else in the mirror, behind her. Not a child, not Krit, something taller, darker, watching, waiting, patient.
For 2 nights, the apartment stayed silent. No sobbing, no blood, no fog on the mirror. Only the faint scent of jasmine and old incense hanging in the corners. Nam allowed herself to breathe. She lit candles at dawn. She spoke softly to the air. She left offerings, small cups of warm milk, sweet rice, a folded crane made from newspaper, for Krit, for his mother, for herself. And in return, she received peace. But on the 3rd night, she woke up standing. She had no memory of rising from bed. Her feet were cold against the tile. Her hands trembled, palms turned upward, fingers spread. She stood in the hallway, facing the empty drawer where the amulet had once lived. The moonlight from the window hit the walls at a strange angle, casting long shadows that didn't match the shape of anything in the room. Nam took a step forward, then another. It wasn't her moving. Her body walked while her mind screamed from somewhere far behind her eyes. And as she neared the drawer, she whispered something, but not in her own voice. Not Thai, not any human language. It was wet, syllabic, a whisper made of breath and rot. Then she woke up, back in bed, sheets soaked in sweat, fingertips stained red. Nam stared at her hands. On her right palm was a perfect circle drawn in blood. On her left, a mark like a wax seal. She had no memory of making either. She didn't want to know what they meant. She returned to Jariya, pale and shaking. "I think something's inside me," she whispered. "Something that isn't Krit." Jariya nodded, unsurprised. "You created an opening. Krit left, but something else came to take his place." Nam's mouth was dry. "What is it?" The medium paused. "A spirit without name, without body, the kind that waits for cracks in the soul. When you fed the amulet with blood, you opened the door. When you freed the boy, you left the house unlocked." Nam closed her eyes. "Then I'm the door." Jariya nodded. "And now something is walking through." That night, Nam did not sleep. She tied her hands together with kitchen twine, poured salt across every threshold, lit every candle she had. But at 2:43 a.m., they all blew out at once, and she heard it. Not sobbing, not laughter, breathing, right behind her ear, slow, deep, familiar, like her own, only just out of sync. The mirrors fogged, the pipes gurgled, the floorboards creaked in a slow, deliberate pattern, like something pacing, waiting. Nam stared into the dark and whispered, "What do you want?" No answer. But on the window pane, written in condensation, a word appeared. Stay. Over the next days, her life began to unravel. The noodle shop closed without warning. Her supervisor at the factory was suddenly fired, and Nam's hours were cut in half. Her mother's health declined again, this time rapidly. Every blessing she had received after accepting the amulet was now reversing, as if rewinding her fate to where it had once been. Only worse, because now she wasn't alone. She began seeing the servant, not clearly, not directly, just shapes, shadows, moments that weren't quite real. Once in the reflection of a teapot, a tall figure, limbs too long, swaying behind her. Once in the folds of her curtain, a face pressed against the fabric, stretching it like wet paper. And always, always, that sound, the breathing, coming from places no breath should be. She stopped eating, stopped answering calls, stopped praying, because every time she tried, she heard a whisper in her own voice say, "Don't speak for both of us." One night, she stood in front of the mirror and asked aloud, "Are you in me?" And the mirror replied, not in words, but in movement. Her reflection blinked. She did not. Her reflection raised a hand. She did not. Then it smiled, wide, crooked, and with the tip of its finger, it traced one word onto the inside of the mirror's surface. Servant. She fell to her knees. The truth hit like water in the lungs. She had not freed herself. She had only inherited the role. The spirit that had once fed off Krit's suffering now fed off hers. And unlike Krit, she had no innocence to protect her. No mother, no ritual, no grave. Only choices. Bad ones. She returned to Phra Ngan one last time. The monk met her gaze with a heaviness that made her feel like a child again.
"I thought I was helping," she said, "but I brought something back with me." Wesuit nodded. "That is the danger with dark spirits. They do not mourn the loss of one soul. They only move on to the next." Nam asked, "Is it using me? My body?" The monk answered quietly, "Not yet, but it is shaping your spirit, like wax. Soon you will not know where it ends and you begin." She was silent, then asked, "Can I fight it?" Wesuit looked at her, long and hard. "No, but you can refuse to serve it, even if it costs you everything." That night, Nam made a choice. She burned every item she had ever used in the rituals, the herbs, the wax, the red thread. She sat in the middle of her living room, empty and trembling, and whispered a single sentence, "You cannot live here anymore." And from the far end of the room, something moved. A shape, a silhouette, the servant. Its head cocked sideways, its limbs bent wrong, and in a voice that almost sounded like hers, it replied, "Then come with me instead."
Nam had never feared herself before, but now she couldn't trust her hands, her voice, her thoughts, because some of them were no longer hers. She had started humming in her sleep, strange melodies she didn't recognize. Her feet moved on their own during the night, leaving muddy prints across the floor. Her mirrors didn't show her face anymore. Only fog, only breath. Each time she blinked, she felt the spirit blink with her. And sometimes she didn't remember blinking at all. She returned to the temple at dawn, desperate, barefoot, sleepless, her eyes sunken, skin pale, fingers still bandaged from nightly bleeding. Phra Wesuit was already sweeping the courtyard. He looked up and, without saying a word, turned and walked toward the back of the temple, toward a place Nam had never been invited to before. She followed him past the stupas, past the garden, past the old bell tower. They walked in silence to a small wooden hut near the back wall, a meditation room reserved for seclusion. He motioned for her to sit. Then he lit a single stick of incense and placed it between them. Only then did he speak. "The spirit you carry," he said softly, "is not a ghost. It is a fragment, a shard of something older, something fed by grief and now by blood." Nam kept her gaze low. Phra Wesuit continued, "It was drawn to you through the amulet, but it has chosen you now, not as its victim, but as its vessel." Nam's voice cracked. "So it's inside me?" The monk nodded. "Partially, but not fully, not yet." She asked, "Can I remove it?" He shook his head. "You are no longer the same person who first picked up the amulet. You are a doorway. Closing that doorway now would shatter you." Nam closed her eyes. A tear slipped down. "Then what do I do?" The monk paused. His eyes, so calm, so old, stared through her, not at her. "You must finish what the ritual began. You must reenact it fully, from the blood to the offering to the boiling." Nam flinched. "Boiling?" He nodded. "Yes, but this time not of a child, not of flesh, but of your own spirit." Phra Wesuit stood and retrieved a scroll wrapped in faded silk. He unrolled it slowly, revealing a hand-drawn diagram, ancient symbols, chants, and a circular seal marked with red ink. "This is the counter-ritual," he said. "It was used centuries ago
to release vessels who had become corrupted by borrowed spirits. It was banned, forgotten, dangerous. Nam whispered, "Why?" "Because it requires sacrifice." He pointed to the center of the scroll, a symbol resembling an eye drawn over a pot. "You must enter a trance, recreate the sacred circle, fill the pot not with water, but with your own essence, hair, nail, blood, voice." Nam swallowed. "And then what?" she asked. He said, "At the moment when the spirit comes to claim you, you must offer it a choice. Take you completely, or be freed forever." Nam's voice caught in her throat. "But if I offer it my body, it might say yes." The monk nodded. "And if it does?" she asked. He said nothing. The silence told her everything. "Will I die?" she asked. "No," the monk replied gently, "but you may no longer be yourself." Nam's voice shook. "And if I try to force it out?" "You will tear from the inside out." She stared at the scroll. The symbols burned into her mind like bruises in firelight. "And if I do nothing?" she asked. The monk's face was grave. "Then you will slowly forget who you are, and one day you will wake up, and it will be you watching from the mirror, unable to move, while something else smiles with your lips." Nam stood slowly. She bowed. And as she turned to leave, Phra Ngan called after her, "There is one final thing you must know." She paused. He said, "If the spirit refuses to leave, you must give it something greater than what it's taken." Nam frowned. "What do you mean?" "A sacrifice," he said softly. "Equal in sorrow, equal in will." Her voice fell to a whisper. "A life?" The monk looked away, but she already knew the answer. That night, Nam stared at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long, long time. It didn't fog, it didn't whisper, but the reflection felt wrong, like it was memorizing her. And for the first time, she whispered to it, "I won't let you stay." The mirror didn't move, but her lips did, on their own. They formed two words: "We'll see."
She didn't eat that day. Nam wandered through the old market in a kind of dream, passing vendors and whispers and incense smoke without seeing any of it. Her arms carried only what she needed, the ingredients, the tools, the relics of memory. One strand of her hair, a vial of her blood, clippings from her nails, and a small jar filled with her tears, collected drop by drop over the past 4 nights. Her offering. Not to appease a god, not to summon a demon, but to tempt something that had already entered her soul, to leave. She found the old canal before dusk, where Crit had once lived, and where, decades ago, he had died screaming into steam. The water moved thick and slow, filled with trash and the ghosts of forgotten prayers. The stilt houses nearby leaned like mourners, their wood rotting with memory. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then stopped. Nam stepped barefoot into the water. Each footfall sank into mud and bone. The current kissed her ankles, pulling gently as if testing her resolve. She walked until she reached the half-collapsed shrine at the far end of the bank, a forgotten spirit house wrapped in red thread and black mold. She placed her hand on the wood. "I'm back," she whispered, and the wind shifted. She set up the ritual as Phra Ngan had instructed, a large brass basin washed in salt water, candles in a circle, ash from sandalwood mixed with old hair, blood, tears, fingernails, and in the center, floating on the surface of the water, a folded square of red cloth. It held nothing inside, and yet it sank, as if something took it. Nam sat cross-legged at the water's edge and began to chant. The words were foreign, sacred syllables passed to her by the monk, heavy and bitter on her tongue. Each line opened something inside her. Each phrase peeled back a layer of memory, of grief, of blood she had spilled willingly and unwillingly. She felt her chest hollowing, her breath shortening, the river rising. The candles flickered blue. And then the water began to boil. Not violently. It bubbled in small, controlled pulses, like something breathing just beneath the surface. Nam didn't stop chanting. She reached into her shirt and removed the final offering, a slip of old newspaper, burned at the corners, faded and yellowed. It was Krit's obituary. No photo, no ceremony, just 5 lines of text beneath a death notice from 30 years ago. She had found it in previous files, wedged between oil and thread. She dropped it into the basin. The water hissed, and the wind died. Then she felt it, the servant. Not Krit, no, the thing that came after. It didn't arrive like a scream or a gust of wind. It didn't slam doors or shatter glass. It arrived through her spine, a coldness, crawling, rising, coiling around her throat, and then inside her head, a whisper. "You called me." Nam didn't open her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I called you here to make a choice." The voice echoed within her. "I already chose. I chose you." She gritted her teeth. "You chose a vessel. I'm offering freedom." Silence. Then laughter. Not joyful, not cruel, just hollow. "You think I want to leave?" Nam opened her eyes. The water had stilled. The reflection on its surface was no longer hers. It was a silhouette, tall, formless, rippling, watching her. She stood. The ritual wasn't working. She could feel it. The spirit was too rooted, too satisfied. It had fed on her sorrow for too long. "You don't belong here. You don't belong in me." The voice inside her responded calmly. "But I fit, don't I?" She gritted her teeth. "Then take it all!" She lifted the brass basin and poured the contents over her own head. Blood, hair, tears, ashes, letting the sacred mixture drench her face and sink into her skin. The wind howled, the water around her surged, and from the trees came weeping. Not a child, not Krit, but many, dozens, all crying from the earth. Nam dropped to her knees, shaking. She whispered to the river, "Please, just take it all, but let me stay me." And in that moment, the voice inside her paused, then spoke one word, "Prove it." Nam gasped. From the center of the river, something rose, slowly, wrapped in threads of black moss and wax. It wasn't the amulet. It was a figure, human-shaped,
but hollow. No face, no skin, just a vessel, a body waiting to be filled. The spirit had given her its choice. It would leave, but only if she offered something in its place. Phra Ngan's words returned to her. If the spirit refuses to leave, you must give it something greater than what it's taken. Now she understood. Not a life, a soul. Nam stepped forward. The water reached her waist, then her chest. She held her breath, then submerged. And as her head slipped beneath the surface, she heard it. The voice. You are enough. Darkness, then silence, then light. She opened her eyes, gasped. She was back on the bank, soaked, cold, alone. The basin lay overturned. The candles had all burned out. The circle was broken. And in her hand, nothing. Nam looked into the water. No reflection stared back. Just ripples. And somewhere far away, a child's laugh. Not mocking, not mournful, free.
The spirit was gone. Nam told herself that. But silence can lie. She returned home just after midnight, barefoot, soaked in river water, throat raw from chanting and weeping. Her hands trembled as she turned the key in the lock. The door opened with a creak that sounded more like a sigh. The apartment smelled like wax, and something else, like breath on glass. She stepped inside. Everything was still, but nothing was right. The first thing she noticed, her reflection was gone. Not shattered, not distorted, just missing. Every surface that once held her image, the bathroom mirror, the window, the television screen, now showed only the room behind her. She moved. The reflection did not. It was as if the world had decided she no longer existed. And deep down, Nam wondered if that was already true. She ran her fingers along the altar. The incense had burned down to black ash. The bowls of milk had curdled. The red thread she'd left for protection had unraveled, now lying limp like dead veins across the wood. The wax figure she had once sealed in the drawer was still gone, but in its place was a new one, not made of wax, made of flesh. It was a figure the size of a child, crouched inside the drawer, knees hugged to chest, head bowed. Its skin was gray and wet, its limbs too thin, its mouth slightly open, and from it came no sound, only dripping. Nam didn't scream. She couldn't. She only whispered, "You're not him." And the figure slowly raised its head. Where eyes should have been, there were only mirrors, and in them, she saw herself, but smiling. She ran, out the door, down the stairs, into the alleyway. But no matter where she turned, it all led back. The alleys bending, the signs unreadable, the streets looping endlessly, until finally she found herself standing once again at her front door. Something had closed the circle. This night would not end until it was done. Nam returned inside, and there, in the center of the room, the reflection waited. Not in a mirror, not in glass, in her. She stood face to face with herself, only not herself. Taller, paler, the smile too wide, the body slightly wrong. But the eyes were hers, and they wept. But the tears were wax. The spirit spoke,
not with voice, but with breath that slid across the walls, curling into syllables made of heat and memory. You gave me your sorrow. You gave me your blood, but you never gave me permission. So now, you will. Nam shook her head. No, I came to release, not to serve. The spirit moved closer, her reflection now almost touching her skin. You are already serving. You wore me every night you bled. You fed me with grief. You built this altar. You carved your own bindings. This body is not yours anymore. Nam whispered, Then take it, and closed her eyes. For a moment, the world fell away. There was no room, no air, no name, only sensation. Falling, sinking, unraveling. Nam felt herself peeling apart, not her skin, but something deeper, like herself with being unscrewed from the world. She saw flashes, a child, a pot, a scream, a shadow behind a woman's back, a thread pulling tight, a mirror that swallowed instead of showing. And then, a choice. The spirit stood before her, no longer wearing her face, but something ancient, something built from all the offerings of all the lives it had consumed. Its body was stitched from wax, bone, and prayer. Its voice was a wind made from all the yeses ever whispered too soon. And it asked, Bind me, or become me. Nam raised her hand. In it, she held one final object, a piece of her childhood. A photo, torn, burned at the edges, of her and her mother, taken long ago when they still lived in the countryside, before the city swallowed them whole, before sickness, before debts, before hunger made her believe in dark prayers. She held it out. This is what you'll never have. Memory, a home, a name. The spirit flinched. Take the pain, but not the soul, Nam whispered, and pressed the photo against her own chest. A sound like thunder. The candles all blew out. The reflection shattered. Not the mirror, the thing wearing her face. It broke like porcelain, wax splintering into 100 silent screams, and from the cracks poured water. Not river water, not blood. Tears, real ones. Nam dropped to her knees, and for the first time in weeks, she cried too. Not for Crit, not for the spirit, for herself. When she opened her eyes, the room was whole. The photo in her hand untouched. The altar clean. The drawer empty. And in the mirror, her reflection had returned. This time, it blinked when she did. She walked to the window. The city breathed as if nothing had happened. But Nam knew the truth. Something had been bound. Not by red thread, not by wax, but by choice. And choice was the only true exorcism.
It didn't end that night. Not really. The spirit no longer wept behind the mirrors. The amulet was gone. The reflections had returned to their place. The apartment was no longer thick with shadows and dripping things. But Nam still bled. At first, she didn't notice. Just a small bead of blood on her finger when she washed the dishes. A red smear on her pillow that she blamed on a forgotten cut. A drop on her shirt collar that she told herself came from cooking. But then came the dreams of children floating face down in still water, of teeth falling from her mouth in silence, of wax figures cradling something soft and twitching, whispering, "You forgot one!" Nam woke each morning more tired than the night before. The spirit was gone, but the servant had not left.
because it wasn't an entity, it was her. She returned to the temple. Phra Ngan was waiting for her, kneeling on the floor in meditation, the morning sun bleeding through the windows behind him. She didn't have to speak. He opened his eyes and said, "It's inside you now." Nam nodded. "It doesn't want my blood anymore." "No," the monk agreed. "Now it wants your place." They sat together for hours. No chants, no rituals, just stillness. Finally, Nam asked, "Can it take me completely?" Phra Ngan didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted a small wooden bowl between them. Inside, a folded leaf holding a tiny wax doll. Not an amulet, not cursed, just a copy of her, crude, fragile. He held it out. "This is your final choice." Nam took it, hands trembling. That night, she lit no candles, said no prayers, there were no circles drawn, no offerings made. She simply sat on the floor in her empty apartment, the wax doll in front of her. She looked at it, at herself, and whispered, "You can't have me, but I will give you this." Then she pricked her finger one last time and let the blood drip onto the doll's chest. It soaked into the wax slowly, like water on old paper. And for a moment, nothing happened. Then, from the corner of the room, the servant stepped forward. Not a child, not a ghost, just an echo of every sorrow she had buried. Tall, shadowless, its face not hers, but made from her, carved from her grief, her rage, her loneliness. It knelt in front of the doll and reached for it. But Nam held out her hand. "Not unless you take it instead of me." The spirit cocked its head, considering, then nodded once and took the doll. What followed wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion, no scream, no lights flickering, just stillness, as if someone had stopped breathing in the center of the world. The spirit dissolved slowly into the wax. Its shape collapsed inward like wet cloth. Its presence curled into the doll's core. And then it was done. Nam placed the doll into a wooden box, wrapped it in red thread, not to bind, but to bury. She walked to the canal at dawn. The sky was soft with mist, and she sank the box into the water without a word. The servant was gone, not destroyed, given something else to wear. Nam offered no chants, no final plea, only silence. And in return, she received peace. Real peace. But that night, as she drifted to sleep for the first time without fear, a single whisper came from the farthest corner of her dreams, soft, childlike, almost forgotten. "You didn't forget me, did you?" Nam smiled in her sleep. "No," she whispered, "I never could."
Some spirits are loud. They bang on walls, they shatter mirrors, they leave footprints on ceilings and crawl into dreams. But some are quiet. So quiet, their pain becomes part of the air. So quiet you forget they're even there, until you start crying for no reason, until you stare at a wall for an hour, until you whisper apologies into the silence and don't know why. Krit had been one of those spirits. Not vengeful, not wrathful, just forgotten. And forgotten things don't scream, they weep. Nam lit a candle on the windowsill. The apartment was still, not haunted, not anymore, but it remembered, and so did she. She thought of his name,
Crit. Just a boy, 7 years old, sick, afraid, promised safety, then dropped into boiling oil. Not because he did anything wrong, but because someone wanted something, and he was small enough to be taken. She thought of Mali, the mother who waited by the water, who heard the pot bubbling in her dreams, but never received her son's ashes. Nam had returned to her just once. She hadn't said much, only placed a small folded crane on her doorstep, made from the same newspaper as Crit's death notice. Inside it, a photo, one of the canal, and written on the back, "He is not alone anymore." Mali never replied, but she didn't have to. Crit's spirit had never asked for anything. No revenge, no promises, no candles, no prayers. All he had ever wanted was to be seen, to be remembered not as a tool, not as a ghost, not as an amulet, but as a child. Nam remembered his face now, not from nightmares, not from mirrors, but from that brief moment just before the wax figure melted, when his smile had flickered through her. It hadn't been wide or happy, just real. She wrote his name in a small notebook. She placed it beside her bed. She promised herself quietly that she would never throw it away, not because it was magical, but because memory is a kind of protection too. And sometimes, the only thing that keeps a spirit from crying forever is knowing someone is listening. That night, Nam dreamed again. Not of boiling water, not of wax or mirrors, but of a boy standing on a riverbank. He was barefoot, holding a white candle, and he was smiling. The kind of smile you give when someone finally says your name out loud after years of silence. He didn't say anything. He just bowed, then turned and walked toward the water. Not into it, alongside it, as if he had a place to go now, as if someone was waiting. Nam woke up with tears in her eyes. But they weren't from fear. They were from the kind of grief that comes after the haunting ends. The kind that doesn't scream. It just sits with you, quietly. The child had cried too long, but he wasn't crying anymore.
Months passed. The rains came and went, flooding the old canals. Shrines collapsed. Shrines were rebuilt. The smell of incense drifted through the alleys again like it always had, as though the city had simply forgotten. But Nam hadn't. She still walked the same streets, past the same vendors and rusted gates. Only now she looked longer at the red string tied around door frames. She paused when she heard chanting from behind closed curtains. And when someone said they were blessed by an amulet, she felt something tighten in her chest because she knew what it might have cost. She no longer dreamed of wax dolls. She no longer heard crying beneath the floorboards. Her reflection always met her eyes now, tired but her own. Still, some nights when the wind blew just right, she'd hear a whisper at the edge of sleep. Almost. One day, while running errands across the river, Nam wandered through a market she didn't recognize, half covered in blue tarp, smelling of durian, diesel, and dust. The stalls were strange, no signs, no prices, just objects arranged like offerings. Jars of teeth, dolls with eyes sealed shut, amulets wrapped in red string and wax. Her breath caught. She turned to leave, but a hand, small and old, reached out from behind a curtain. "Looking for protection?" the woman asked, smiling with lips too red. Nam didn't answer. The woman tilted her head. "I remember you. You've carried before." Nam's voice barely rose. "I'm not looking for anything." The woman nodded. "But something might still be looking for you." She reached beneath the table and brought out a box, small, velvet-lined, wrapped in red string. Nam's heart dropped. The wax seal was familiar, too familiar. She stepped back. "I don't want it." The woman just smiled. "No one does, not at first." Nam walked away. She didn't look back, didn't ask who the box was for, didn't ask if it was the same one or just another. Because she knew something now. It's never just one. There are always more. At home, she lit a single candle and placed it by her notebook, the one with Krit's name written in trembling ink. She whispered, "I won't forget." Not him, not the ritual, not the cost. And she knew she had one final duty, to remember for others who would never know what they were asking for. That night, as the candle burned low, the wax spilled over the rim of its holder, slow, red, warm. It dripped in a straight line and landed on the edge of the notebook, just one drop, shaped like a tear. Nam looked at it for a long time, then closed the book and whispered, "No more blood, no more servants." But from far off, across the water, maybe deeper, a faint sound answered. Not crying, not laughter, just breathing, as if something still waited, still watched, still listened. Because in the dark corners of Bangkok, behind the markets, beneath the floorboards, beyond the mirror, some amulets are never truly gone. They don't die. They wait for someone desperate enough to open the box again. Someone who doesn't ask where the power comes from. Someone who believes they have nothing left to lose. And when that person arrives, the wax will still be warm, the string will still be red, and the voice inside will whisper once more, just one drop.